Hello and welcome. How many of us have tried to map our face on a short clip with an app such as Reface or a fake app? We can see that artificially intelligent face swap videos known as deepfakes are more sophisticated and accessible than ever. To talk about this AI technology phenomenon, its possible impact, the influence of maybe social media, and at large how the media of photography is evolving, I'm absolutely delighted to have the multimedia artist and pioneer technologist Tamiko Thiel and Jon Uriarte, digital curator at the Photography Gallery for the project Lend Me Your Face, Go Fake Yourself, currently on view at the Photographers Gallery until 17th of March. So just a quick highlight on your extended biographies to both of you. Graduated from Stanford University as a design engineer, Tamiko Thiel also studied and worked at MIT AI lab startup Thinking Machine Corp that initiated the Connection Machine 1, or known as CM1, which was the most advanced computer of its generation, leading the way towards artificial intelligence. Then Tamiko decided for our greater good to merge a promising engineer career with the arts. So Tamiko works in a variety of media ranging from supercomputers to digital prints, time-based videos to interactive 3D with all the spectrum of XR tools in your artworks and installation. For the current project Lend Me Your Face, you use an open source deepfake neural network framework. Let's go to Jon. Jon Uriarte is the curator of digital programs at the Photographers Gallery. As a photographer field curator, Jon took part in many prestigious festivals and exhibitions. I'm only going to name a few. You have Gettoxo Photo International Image Festival, the Photo Collectania, Dawn, and most recently Le Château d'Eau in France. Jon is also a photography tutor at IDEP, an essay writer, and also a researcher at Macbeth Study Center. He founded the Photo Book Club Barcelona and co-founded Wide Photo. So let's dive into the world of high-tech selfies and deepfakes with you two. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Well, thank you for this tutorial. It's pretty easy to upload, and what is fantastic to discover is that the new technologies are so fast and so easy to use. Well, the project Lend Me Your Face, Go Fake Yourself, it's a participative project, and I call it bilateral because what I mean is that not only the lenders, the people who are graciously lending their face, play the game with you, but you as well, Tamiko, play with the people's expectations. So when does the participant realize that you're subtly playing with them?
I think a lot of people realize that when all of a sudden they see themselves mimicking someone who they don't like. And a lot of people have said, well, can I choose who I get to be or who I get to mimic? And I'm going, no, that's the whole part of the project. And that's also the reason why I think it's really interesting to use a software that's not perfect, so that you can also see more of what's happening. And, there's a lot of deepfakes out there that are really perfect. And, I can't tell the difference between them and the original with Obama or with Mark Zuckerberg or so. But the interesting thing about the software that we're using is that it doesn't rely on hours and hours and hours of video of you in order to animate your face. It only needs one photograph, and as you saw, that was the video was in real time, so it's really less than a minute before we can get you your first deep fake if there's no one else in the queue. So for me, the whole thing is not the perfection of it, and not saying, look what we can do if we take all the time in the world and have all the material in the world, but look what we can do with you personally. And the fact that you are uploading the image yourself means that you're giving us permission to generate these deepfakes. So that immediately makes you sort of culpable. You're involved emotionally in a way that you're not if you see a deepfake of some politician or some celebrity. So that was the aspect that really interested me, was this personal connection. And, if we had been able to show it publicly at the gallery, on the media wall of the photographer's gallery, which we can't because of the COVID lockdown, then you would have also seen your face being shown publicly as being as mimicking the words of this public figure who you may or may not support, and saying words that you may or may not support. So it's this sort of stealing of your identity, stealing of the self, because, the expressions of your face are really, as I've written, the most intimate part of the self in a lot of ways, but also the part that's at this point is the easiest to steal and manipulate. So it's this personal involvement and being able to get it so quickly and getting such a quick feedback that I think is really the interesting part of the project to me, and that also emotionally grabs participants the most strongly.
Thank you. How do you select the original footage? How did you pick it?
Oh, this is all taken from the internet. I could go into archives and was actually looking at that also, but I decided, the first version I did, it was around September or so, and when the first version of this opened, of course, for me as an American citizen, we were coming up on the November election, and the big question, will we be able to get Trump out of office? And so I'm, also in looking for ways to really get people personally involved, I was looking for figures who cause strong emotions, either positive or negative. And of course, there's, as we found out, there are 70 million people who in the US who like Trump a whole lot. And there's 77 million liked Biden better. Having Trump in there, and Obama, who, still carries a lot of positive emotion for a lot of us. Greta Thunberg, who I really think is doing really amazing things that no one else, mobilizing the world in a way no one else has been able to do. And then Angela Merkel, who has been guiding Germany, where I've been living for decades at this point. And she's being able to guide the country through a lot of crises in a very calm and deliberate way, which is really, for me, the opposite of what Trump was doing with the USA. So they were people who spoke very strongly to me, either positively or negative, and where I thought I would get a strong resonance, to show it either in Germany where I live or in the US where I come from. And then, of course, when I got the invitation from Jon to show at the Photographers Gallery in London, then I thought, well, it's now after the US elections, for one thing, and I really don't want to see Trump anymore. I talked to Jon about what sort of figures are of emotional resonance with larger audience in Great Britain, and then of course used my own personal preferences also. So you see Greta Thunberg again, and then her British counterpart David Attenborough, and then and then Boris Johnson, who I must say produces the best fakes of anyone else that we've used, and then the Queen, who for me was really a counterpart, just like Obama and Trump were counterparts. Then the Queen and Boris Johnson are a little bit of counterparts in terms of their public personalities. And I thought maybe the Queen would be a little bit too boring, but compared to the sort of dramatic urgency of the other three, she was so wonderfully calming and saying, "We shall meet again." And even the very subtle movements of her face and her intonation conveyed in the deepfakes a surprising amount of information, if you will, conveyed a surprising amount of content. So I thought she was a wonderful foil to the other more sort of dramatic and jiggly. It is very much a personal choice, but really also trying to find some people who you would feel comfortable mimicking, no matter what side of the fence you sit on, and some other people who you might be very uncomfortable mimicking. And that is a very conscious choice to produce sort of a positive and a negative reaction in the same person, regardless of what part of the political spectrum they came from.
Yeah, I guess that having a variety of expressions and also a variety of, I would say, political views was quite important, because in this idea of embodying someone, it's good for the project to have someone who might think similar to you, and someone else who might similar just opposite of your political views, and also even your way of expressing. So you can see how your this algorithms is taking over your own body or face in this case, and way of speech, and also how it's faking your political views with the message that they send. So yeah, I guess that matter, the choosing is just to have this variety of people.
I think as an artist, I'm very context driven. I very often react to the specific context, whether that's a location, whether that's really one place in the city, or whether that's the context more of a country as it is in this case. And also, I must say that it depends on being able to find material online that fits. In this with this neural network, we have a specific data set that the researcher used called Vox Celeb, and they were gleaned from the internet, but they were interviews with celebrities, and interviews are taken mostly straight on. The person is looking directly into the camera, and that's why it works best if you upload that sort of image. And when I was looking for videos that I could use to drive the deep fakes, then in the first instance, I really wanted to use Merkel's "Wir schaffen das, wir schaffen das." And I really wanted to use Obama. And Obama, I found out also, he'll talk here, and then he'll talk there. And every time he moves his head, when he's looking straight ahead, his eyes are closed, and he only opens his eyes when he's looking up in the corner. And it made it really hard. So it does depend on finding good video of a person, and good video where they're saying something interesting. So, for instance, I was looking at Martin Luther King. I had a dream in the first instance, and one thing is that the quality is low from that era, and they would also often cut to the crowd. And then you get into other things like when he's saying, I have a dream that my daughters will not be judged by the color of the skin. And then in this time of Trump's white supremacy, if you have a white person saying that, then all of a sudden, you're throwing yourself in the white supremacist camp. So it's really interesting when you say, okay, this is going to be for a wide distribution, and you want all sorts of people to be using it, and then you start thinking about, okay, well, how does that come over at this particular time in the political situation that you are in right now? And of course, that varies over time, that varies over place, but it's something that, I as a political person then also want to be very conscious of. So the answer is yes, definitely, and it depends on the situation.
Looking for your next speakers, so depending where you're going, right? Well, how many people have you got already participating in Germany and here now in London or in America?
We don't record for that sort of personal information, so we only know how many people have uploaded images, and it's around 250 or so. We know that maybe 700 or more people have looked at the site, but in terms of actual uploading images to try it out, it's been about 250. But like I said, we don't record.
When we are in a period where there are millions of selfies published every day, that people might be overly shy all of a sudden to share their image, enhancing the three factors of beauty, of happiness, and easy life, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of these images are very distorted. I mean, even if the upload a photograph that works really well, then you personally might still say, oh my God, I look awful, because it's distortion of the face. So we found that the people we've been able to get to agree to have their faces their deepfakes go public, older people who are more confident, not as beautiful as they used to be, and artists for whom performance and distortion and glitch is part of also their art.
And also, I would say that younger people is much more conscious about their own image, and they take, their own digital image, and they take a lot of care on curating that image online. So they are, of course, all over the place with the selfies and all these kind of things, but all these, like each of one of those selfies has been selected and usually carefully filtered and altered. So even if it looks like they are completely okay and comfortable with sharing their images, it's more about they are okay about controlling what image they want to publish online. So that's a big difference. And in this case, in Tamiko's work, what actually she's proposing is to lose control over your own image. So that's why it makes a lot of sense also that younger people doesn't want to allow us to use that, because it's a way of challenging that notion of control over your own digital image.
Great. So my next question is maybe a little bit more about the photography and how it evolves. Can we consider that all those deepfakes are still photography, Jon?
It depends who you ask and in which context. I'm totally in favor of the most open and widened definition of photography. Also because I think that photography is present in many other technology. It's a tool that it's been in the beginning of cinema, in the beginning of many other mediums. So I think that when you are looking at film, you have to look also at the photography of the film. And when you are looking into deepfakes, in this case, you have to also look and understand how photography works, because it's on the base of, on the starting point of those technologies. And also, we have to acknowledge that photography is not anymore as it used to be. It's mostly created by computers, by small computers on phones. You just have to, we do all have to acknowledge that most of the photography nowadays is created on smartphones. And the way of creating those photos is, has very little to do with how analog photography was made. It's much more about algorithms and computers. In fact, it's called computational photography. So, we don't have to frame photography in that context. The thing here is that most of the photographic institutions or photographic institutions working with photography as art, let's say, are not focusing so much on that, and still try to keep on the idea of the traditional notions of photography, and don't look so much on the more current ways of producing photography. Yeah, and that's the digital programs of the Photographers Gallery is trying at least to go in that direction, and to acknowledge how photography is changing technologically, and try to bring it closer to the wider audiences who are also interested in culture, in art and in culture in relationship to photography. Mm-hmm. So, for me, it is photography.
All right. So, as we see that the technology evolves and enhances, does that mean that the skills of the photographers, are they evolving? Or?
Yeah, there's no other way. Photography, you need a tool. It's not like, singing, that you can just sing, or dancing, or any other medium. You need the tool. Without the tool, there's no way of creating photography unless you are creating a camera oscura, but you still need a room with a hole. So, of course, people need to, practitioners need to evolve their knowledge and their skills on the technologies that they are using. Then again, photography, as I said before, I think it's a quite conservative medium, and even more in the framework of art institutions and cultural institutions who are still thinking on traditional notions of photography. I can see how there's many people looking into these new technologies, but not so many photographers, people who has been trained on photography per se, are looking into this. So I think that there's a lot of work to do in that sense, and there are many skills that have to be like learned by photography practitioners to learn about how all these new technologies are working. So, I mean, of course they are evolving, but they need, particularly photographers, will need to evolve much faster and keep track of what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. So are we moving to a much more software-based practice instead of lens-based? Because nowadays no one can escape the Adobe suite and
it's a mix. I would say it's a mix. Yeah, I mean, we still need the lenses, but the lenses bringing the light into a digital sensor, let's say, not to start being too technical. It's a mix between a computational and lens-based field, and we should learn about both. And we should try to keep up to date, which is not easy because I recognize that things evolve and move super quickly, and it's difficult to keep track. But yeah, I mean, definitely photography is software based right now, so we should be looking into that.
It was interesting when I was visiting artists at Duke University. I don't know when that was, maybe 7 years ago at this point. It was in a department that had evolved out of documentary photography, actually, originally. And so, so there were a lot of like sort of old school documentary photographers who were professors, but then they had moved the department into wanting to look at, I mean, just like Photographer's Gallery is the oldest gallery for photography in London, and so it's really interesting that that's the gallery that's looking furthest into the future. But what the professors said in the department was that their students had all essentially, so to speak, grown up with smartphone photography and certainly digital cameras, where basically all you had to do is press the button. You didn't have to set the aperture, and you certainly didn't have to go into the darkroom. And they said they're so used to just being able to press a button and get a perfect photo that they are really interested in things like, I forget the brand, but there's some Russian camera that's so poorly made that it usually has light leaks, which of course then produce all sorts of funny effects on the film, and because it is using actual film. And so they were fascinated by these poorly working, again, these glitch devices that couldn't take good photographs if you did everything right, So there's maybe like a pendulum that goes back and forth, but I think it's really interesting in this age of perfect photography, then also to say, let's look at the glitches, let's look at where the perfect photography is showing its dirty underwear, and so we can find out more about what's really happening behind that button or behind that cloud of software that's between us and the process.
Yeah, glitches are the places many times where I like to look to the real nature of digital technologies, like on the like failures that they have in those kind of those kind of like unexpected problems. You can see how that technology works, and it's quite useful to look into those like attempts that maybe haven't like achieved what they were supposed to achieve, because you can understand how they were built and what was the original purpose for them. And it's usually like perfect looking images make you focus just on that surface and don't allow you to go deeper. And so depending on the case, what you are looking for, I mean, glitches are as useful and as beautiful as any of the like perfect image.
Following on that, asks Jon if he could talk about how the Photographer's Gallery has been really now for a couple of years and now this year into the future, looking at deepfakes, looking at data sets. Can you give the audience a little bit more of an overview of what your program has shown, and still you can get a lot of information off the internet from your website on past programs?
We've been looking into data sets, which are like the collections of images that are used to train algorithms. So like to train an algorithm to identify a face or to identify that there's a person in an image or this kind of things, you first need to train it in a data set. So, and those data sets are usually collections of images that are like taken, like downloaded from the internet. And we've been looking into how those data sets are being created by computer scientists and how they are also employing people like the known as mechanical Turks, maybe, you know, the marketplace where people can do like this, like small jobs, let's say, gigs. And also, what's the impact of those data sets once the algorithm has been trained? So we have had like a number of commissions of works that have been shown on the video wall, but also a large series, like a lot of essays that we commission to not only artists but also researchers and curators, and sometimes they are not like even like let's say art related researchers, but for instance those we published an article of how the German car industry is hiring people to tag images to train the algorithms that then are going to be driving the cars, the self-driving cars. That's just one of the samples. Or we also had Fei-Fei Li, who is still a computer scientist who built the most, I would say, influential data set, like visual data set ever, ImageNet, a visual data set that has been used to train a lot of algorithms that are being used nowadays. And we had her like we did like an anniversary celebration or party, a party of the 10th birthday party of ImageNet, and she was present there, and she explained how that dataset was made. Also because the influence of that dataset is so huge and so unknown, I would say, as well, for the most of the public, that it was like really important for us to bring her. So those are a few examples of we have done with dataset match.
Yeah, and it was exactly that video from Fei-Fei that really amazed me to find it, you know, on your website, because, you know, some of you might know that back in the 80s I was working at an artificial intelligence company, Thinking Machines, and I was doing, you know, I was doing mechanical engineering. I was doing the product design for the supercomputer, the connection machine. I wasn't doing AI research, but of course, you know, I knew. I was very well versed in what was going on then, and then that went into an AI winter when specifically the American military stopped funding supercomputer research because they said, well, you know, the Berlin Wall fell. We won the war. We don't need all that money going to fighting the Soviets. And then all of a sudden in, you know, 2015 or so, all of a sudden AI pops up, and everything that we had tried to do and everything that, you know, the connection machine was you know, Brewster Kahle, who also started the Internet Archive, was doing the first full text English language, natural language searches on the connection machine, and navigation systems that, you know, everyone has on this thing. We were running the first ones on the connection machine back in 84, but that video on your website with Fei-Fei talking about ImageNet, and this was the point when all of a sudden the data that was needed by neural nets to function was all of a sudden there in 2012, and then the convolutional neural networks could grab onto that and run off it with it. And that data was missing in the 80s when we were working at Thinking Machines. And before the social web, people were saying, you will never get millions and millions of images. You will never get that sort of data. And then, you know, the social web comes along, and all of a sudden people start feeding all their images. And then, you know, Fei-Fei collects it together in one set. And then the AI researchers grab it and go off and running. And that for me was the missing link that I hadn't known about from the, you know, the AI time in the late 80s, early 90s. And the current time when all of a sudden it works just exactly like we said it would back then. And how did we bridge from that time to this time over the AI winter? So I really encourage everyone who's interested in this to go and peruse their website, because there's just fascinating stuff that really gives you a wonderful overview that I haven't seen in any other place.
Thank you, Tamiko.
So,
yeah,
thank you.
No, it's been. I also have to say that the program was started before I joined the gallery, because I joined the gallery like less than 2 years ago, and it was already started with Katrina Sluis, my predecessor as digital curator at the gallery. But I was very lucky and happy to join the gallery right on that time when we were starting with it as a match. And and Faith-Leslie's talk was one of the highlights, I would say, of the program. In fact, we are working now on a book that we hopefully will publish this year, with a collection of the essays that we've been publishing on Unthinking Photography, which is the name of the platform where we publish these essays, interviews, and online projects as well. So.
Great. Shall we invite someone from the audience to come and join us on stage to say hi or to ask a question?
Hello.
Hey.
I was I asked that question a while ago, but after listening to Jon speak a little, I want to expand on it, because I actually find the piece, I know you did it before, but it's so perfect after January 6th. And in terms of the expanding consciousness, the awakening, mass awakening about the algorithmic self as the deciding, as bringing down democracy in the world, and in the United States.
So January 6th, the day that Trump rallied his mob to attack the Capitol to try and present them certifying the election.
And so and they're scary. These things you made, aren't funny. They're really scary. They're monsters. They're sort of flat affect puppets that are being puppeted by these mediated political figures that are so flat them anyway. And then it's this triple flattening. So I found that, were you thinking about a kind of critique of the algorithmic self when you produced this a couple years ago?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it ping pongs back and forth between the algorithmic self and, what are we creating, or what are people creating out of us? And then the pre-digital, the fascist call to power, giving up the self. Part of the reason that I moved to Germany in 1985 was that, if you remember, the Cold War was still going on, and the division between East and West Europe was running right through Germany. So I thought, well, that's the place, if I want to understand more of what has shaped at least the Western world that I've lived in, then Germany is the place to find that out. So of course, being in Germany and being in a leftist crowd in Germany, then, you learn a lot about, well, how did Hitler essentially take over a country? And there was a very funny phenomenon that happened when I told people in Boston. So I was in the MIT startup crowd in Boston. Of course, a lot of university people, and then I decided to move to Germany to see if I could go to an art school, and all sorts of stuff started coming out, like, Germany, it's so dark there. And then the statements about, of course the Germans are naturally fascist, and that's why they followed Hitler, and Americans are naturally good, and we would never be able to do something like that. So yeah, I mean, Trump was really the person who showed America its dirty underwear. Of course, lots of people, like, the entire Black community has known this for hundreds of years, but now, a larger portion of the white community has now understood that we are all capable of following following evil. And that's, and so for me, all of these various selves, these political, public, algorithmic selves, are all wrapped up into a very complicated.
Well, also, right, I mean, speaking of MIT, you know, the Doc Lab that's run by William Uriarte, who's an old friend of mine since 40 years. He wrote a book about 25 or 30 years ago about Nazi television and about how significant that was in going into the homes of the German public in this intimate way in terms of how effective it was at brainwashing, right? The hearth, the talking head, etc. And so likewise, Facebook. So, you know, which we need with this rising tide of realism, hyper-realism. And that's sort of what I wanted to ask you about, Jon, because I'm biased. So I only work with simulations technologies. So do you folks think we do photography?
I do. I think that photography is involved in your work process. I don't think that any medium can be defined like purely, like this is pure photography or this is pure new media art or net art or these kind of things. But I do believe that photography is involved in your work process, and therefore it has to be also like thought and worked, and it could be also included in an institution that is working with photography, and that in our case has photography in its own title, even as the Photographers Gallery, which is our name. So yeah, I mean, of course.
In short, yes.
Yes, a big yes. Yeah, and also in relationship to what you were asking, Tamiko was talking before. I think that in her work, particularly in this work, there's a mix between like the desire of trying that tool and also the like being afraid of trying it because you know that it's gonna be playing with you. But there's this mix between like the desire of wanting to try new technology that happens every time that someone announces a new engaging technology, and also being kind of afraid of using it at the same time. And the tension between those two poles is quite interesting, and it's something that happens, and we've seen happening many times, like with other applications that we've seen being published recently, like the Face app, the one that got you like older, that everyone wanted to try it, and then everyone realized that the data that they were harvesting, it was being used for another purpose. No, it's like this always this desire of playing with the tool, and at the same time certain like I don't know, like being afraid of using it at the same time. And that's something that I think that Tamiko's work, particularly this project, explores pretty well.
So that's pretty diabolical of you, Tamiko.
Well, what are artists supposed to do? Look who's talking about diabolical, Claudia.
I would like to thank you for this intense conversation about your project. I really wish that we are going out of lockdown very soon, so London can go and invade the Photographers Gallery. And so, thank you so much for joining the talk.